Her academic training was in chemical engineering and applied chemistry at the University of Toronto with postgraduate work in biochemical engineering at McGill University. She is presently an adjunct investigator with the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario Research Institute in Ottawa. Dr. Sears authored a report entitled The Medical Perspective on Environmental Sensitivities for the Canadian Human Rights Commission. For this work, she collaborated with many physicians, medical researchers, and architects on topics regarding environmental health and the built environment. Her recent research has included a review on toxic metals that was funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and Social Sciences and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. Dr. Sears lectures at the Universities of Ottawa and Toronto and Lakehead University on topics including epidemiology and toxicology, chemical assessment, interpretation, and synthesis of scientific literature regarding health in the environment and pesticides and toxic metals. Dr. Sears' presentation is entitled Chemical Assessment, Effects for Individuals and Society. Dr. Sears.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm so thrilled to be here. It's quite an honor. And when I was preparing for this evening, I wasn't too sure exactly what was going to transpire or who the audience was. And so I put together a talk that I hope won't insult the intelligence of the scientists here, but will be accessible and understandable to everybody. So I hope it's enjoyable. This is just an overview of what we'll be doing, what I'll be talking about tonight. Basically, we're all special, and we're going to talk about chemicals. What do we mean by chemicals, and toxicities, and biological effects, and how they are tied in with chronic diseases, and what we can do as individuals, and what our society and government can do. So we're all special. These are really special people. And not only are the beautiful young ladies who are very clever and going to university, but they're also blonde and redheaded, and they sunburn very easily. So we all have our strengths, we all have our weaknesses. And this is somebody who doesn't sunburn as easily, and he's also looks like a very fine athlete. This is somebody who is well known for not being a very good athlete, but he's incredibly good at physics. And this is a dog. He'd like to think he's a person. He's a dog, and he's terrible at physics. But he's very good at metabolizing things. He seems to be able to metabolize anything he eats off the forest floor without any ill effects whatsoever. And some of us are not as good at metabolizing things. Some of us seem to be more sensitive to things in our environment than others. And some of the most sensitive people, we say, have environmental sensitivities, and they can have very severe symptoms, as you've heard, when they're exposed to various factors in their environment. And tonight I'll be focusing on chemicals in the environment. So what do we mean when we talk about chemicals? You know, is it something in a lab? That's a chemical. Some people think of chemical factories spewing out smoke, and some people think of the chemicals that are put out by vehicles, all the pollution along the roads. There are our houses, our environments are full of chemicals. And there's a concern in homes, not only with the indoor air, but the peeling lead paint or lead in pipes and maybe contaminating drinking water. So those are chemicals. We have no end of chemicals in all the junk and the stuff that we have around. There's lots of different kinds of plastics and things in the plastics that we'll talk a bit about. McDonald's had to recall glasses because they They had cadmium, which is very toxic in the paints. My favorite chemicals, of course, are food and the water we drink. Those are all chemicals as well. So chemicals, it's a very broad term. It means things, air. So we're going to have to focus a little bit more rather than just saying chemicals. There are chemicals that we consider toxic. And it used to be that for thousands and thousands of years, through most of our evolution, humans were exposed to a fairly constant set of chemicals. But within the last couple of generations, we have vastly expanded the repertoire of chemicals in our environment. We've been manufacturing brand new ones that had never been, that people and animals have never been exposed to before. So it's a very rapid kind of adaptation that we would like to attempt, but we're not being very successful about it. So, we've had belugas washing up on the shores of the St. Lawrence. We have birds that are contaminating the Arctic, and that's related to some of the chemicals that were used, such as PCBs from a long time ago. We're also producing no end of plastic and plastic stuff, which is creating huge gyres in the ocean and is even collecting in the guts of birds. This is an albatross from the Pacific. We have the same problem in the Canadian Arctic with birds that have so much plastic junk in their stomachs that there's no room for food. When you talk about chemicals, some people think about terrible accidents such as in the Gulf of Mexico, or the volcano that erupted in Iceland shutting down the airlines, or Fukushima in Japan, the nuclear disaster there. This is a map of Canada, and we have a lot of sites that are federal contaminated sites. So Canada has a large number of places where there is a concern about toxic chemicals. And these are all of them. The backstory here is that if a mining company or an industry goes bankrupt and leaves the country, then the federal government is left holding the bag. And so it has lands, but these are contaminated lands, they're liabilities, and so the Treasury Board keeps track of all of these sites. And you can search on the internet right down to your own neighborhood and find out roughly what kinds of chemicals are involved. But we see the dew line across the top there, and we see industrial sites, old mining sites, lots of different types of sites that are contaminated with one way or another. Now, just because there's a spot on the map doesn't mean that it is immediate threat to human health. A lot of these are remediated, but it is an expense to continually deal with these sites. Now, when we talk about things like contaminated sites and so on, then people are exposed to the chemicals, and these man-made chemicals usually have some kind of effects on the people. And historically, we've just been exposed to either chemicals in the environment that our bodies have learned to deal with to a certain extent over millennia, or nutrients. And we know, for instance, vitamin A, well, it's very important for your skin and your eyes and for your development. And if you don't have enough, then it can affect your the development and your eyesight. And so you can, take pills, or you can simply eat healthy food and get enough vitamin A. And then, as long as you have the right amount, then that's good. But if you have too much, then you can end up with birth defects and liver problems and skin changes and, again, vision problems. So this whole idea that there's this kind of sweet spot of the right amount of chemicals, and then there's this threshold over which you will have toxic effects. That's true for essential nutrients, but somehow or other it got translated into how one should consider toxic chemicals as well, and this actually isn't really appropriate. So we now realize that really there's no threshold for toxicity, that any exposure is of some concern regarding things like lead and mercury, dioxins and known carcinogens.